Okay, so welcome everyone to this session 250. Wow, that's lots of sessions on mobilizing private capital for housing resilience. So I hope you're all here for that session. Otherwise, this is the moment to switch to the other rooms. This is the mobilizing private capital for housing resilience. Welcome everyone, and welcome to our panelists today. We have a packed session. We're starting a little bit of late, but we have 50 minutes, but hopefully we'll get this through. I want to start by setting a little bit the stage. As we probably, the ones that are here sitting, and we all know, housing is perhaps the single most important asset that most families will ever have in their lifetime. It's the place where most of not only the shelter happens, but most of the capital accumulation and the investment is happening. Unfortunately, when a disaster happens, it's in many cases very unprotected. So families find themselves having invested significant of time in either self-production or self-building, significant amount of savings, significant amount of leverage, destroyed very quickly. And one of the things at the World Bank that we are trying to do is support our clients to improve the situation or to make it less painful. And realizing that that is not something that governments can do on their own, and households cannot also not do on their own. We put together this session to try to think with you and brainstorm and give some examples of how we can improve the situation in our client countries. We have 4 panelists today that will address several or different building blocks of this issue. And I am going to introduce them as they will talk, so that then we'll have some Q&A, some questions that I will pose to each of them. Hopefully we'll finish and we'll have some opportunity for Q&A from the audience as well. I'm going to start with Mr. Hadianto Rashid, and I will please ask for your apologies for my pronunciation of your name. It's the mayor of Palu City in Indonesia. It's a city of around 300,000 people, I understand. And he will focus on sharing with us some innovative building technology called Risha that has been used successfully and extensively in Indonesia for the reconstruction of post-disaster affected houses. I believe you don't have slides today, but if you can speak briefly at that, then I'll pose some questions for you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thanks again to the World Bank, especially to welcoming me here to attend in this forum, to share about how the project that run by the World Bank in Central Sulawesi. As I already mentioned before in early meeting in the other rooms, that I'm saying rehabilitation and reconstruction that are running in Central Sulawesi, as one of the staff of the World Bank say, this is the best design and house among the projects that are undertaken by the World Bank. I'm not saying this because I'm happy with it, because I want to say happy, how can I say I'm happy while my people already have been hit by big disasters such as earthquake, tsunami, and liquefaction, and make my people is hard to rebuild again their houses. But so that's I agree with the principle, with the concept of a World Bank that put in reconstruction in Palu. They say build better before. They build better before. So I wanna share you about the simply construction house that built in Palu that we call it Risa. Risa is a construction that very simple, because it's already need about a month amount to build a house, and this is needed probably only 3, 4, 5% to build it, to build it. And aftermath of disaster, we the impact of the disaster affected about almost 6,000 houses, 6,000 houses in Palu, and when the World Bank, when the Central Sulawesi Rehabilitation and Construction are running to build the houses, it's only needed about 3 months. 3 months to build those houses. So this is very, very simple. But the challenges is now how to the government cannot stand alone by itself to solve everything. So we need from the outside to help us to push this thing can be very, very effective in the future, and not just for build house after the disaster, but how to make this concept as a prevention. As a prevention, to make everything more better and better before something happen. So this is a good time. This is a great time for me to share this, and hope that we are here can give the way how to support this project can be more effectively built in the future, especially in my city. Thank you.
Thank you. It's impressive, the speed of the reconstruction, which is something that is always a challenge. Any thoughts on how we can scale up this system that has worked in your city to be able to replicate it more and more, for example?
Yeah, as example, this RISA not just we use it for building the houses, but not just houses, but we use it for building a school and healthcare center, such like that. So yeah, probably with the collaboration with someone more expert with this thing, probably this research can develop it more better.
Okay, thank you very much. And we can later also have another sort of round on discussions on what are the roles of the public sector and the private sector can play in this scaling up, which is something we're all ambitioning. I'm going to move now to our next panelist, which is Astrid Manroth. Astrid is the head of the Global Infrastructure Facility. I just didn't want to downgrade your title. Astrid, if you can share a little bit with us what gives involvement in this sector, what has been your experience, and then I have a couple of questions as well.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much. Is this on?
Doesn't seem to be on, I don't think so.
Good morning.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting the Global Infrastructure Facility to this important debate. And just by a way of very brief introduction to those of you who don't know the GIF, as we call it, we are a global public-private collaboration platform anchored in the multilateral system with a task to advise governments in emerging markets and developing economies in preparing infrastructure projects for private investment. So that's basically what we do. We provide a transaction advisory service, project preparation services, and thereby really connecting the work that PPIF and others are doing on the upstream enabling environment to downstream finance from the private sector. And the GIF's infrastructure mandate is broad, so it includes social infrastructure as well. In that context, we have actually supported 3 social housing projects as part of our overall global portfolio, which includes 170 projects in 68 countries across infrastructure sectors more broadly. And before I zoom into that, just to say, project preparation is really very good business, because every $1 that we have provided in project preparation support has attracted over $100 in private investment, purely private investment at financial close. And with that, let's maybe briefly zoom in why we want to attract private capital into social infrastructure. I mean, we all know that we're not on track to meet the SDGs, so that alone in infrastructure is requiring 2 to 4 trillion per year in order to close the gap by 2030. But within that also, the data shows that over 100,000 homes would have to be built per day by 2030 in order to close the housing gap, which is a daunting number. So it's very clear that from public sources alone, this cannot be met. So we need to together mobilize the private sector to come to the table. And of course, in that context, and I guess that's why we're talking today, making those investments climate proof and climate hazard proof is key, because it's good business to invest today in climate adaptation, because otherwise you risk you run the risk basically that you are building assets that may not be climate proof, that you may have stranded assets, or that will have to be rebuilt at very high cost. So we basically, in the projects that we have supported, have done that through a number of approaches. And let me give you an example. When we look at applications, for example, that come in, we really make sure that we ask the project developers, and also then our technical partners who support the project development, whether they have analyzed all the climate risks and hazards that are related to the project. And if that has not been the case, then we really provide the support to do the studies required. So whether it's the physical risk assessment, or a flood risk assessment, or other considerations that have to be taken. And then after the risk assessment has taken place, of course, the findings have to be built into the project design to make it resilient. Through the technical feasibility study, the environmental and social feasibility study, and also the financial model to take account of those factors. So those kinds of analysis we can support. And then finally, the objective is really to make sure that once projects go for tendering for a private investor, that we have also the right KPIs in the tender documents to make sure that the design will be implemented and the assets will be climate proof. So maybe briefly, let me touch upon an example where we have done this in Timor-Leste. You may be a little bit familiar. Timor-Leste is really a country with rapidly growing population, and the majority of them, I think over 60%, is concentrated on migrating to the capital in Dili in search of employment opportunities. And as a consequence, you have a large, rapidly growing, unregulated housing market and informal settlements, and they are, of course, particularly at risk to climate impact and other risks as well. So the Global Infrastructure Facility has supported, with its technical partner IFC, a project to really create an affordable housing market in Timor-Leste through our transaction advisory services. And in this case, the objective is to provide around 2,000 affordable homes in a site near the capital. And Timor-Leste, as you may appreciate, is also exposed to a number of climate-related risks, actually, including, severe weather, flooding, earthquakes. So in order to ensure resilience of the project at the project level, we supported the analysis of flooding risks, analysis of the hydrology risk, climate, rainfall, etc., and then ensured that in the technical design, according mitigation measures were built in. For example, through drainage and other requirements, but also in the building standards themselves, making sure that the project will adhere to the EDGE standard, which is both green but also bakes in adaptation considerations. So let me maybe stop there, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of those other points during the discussion. Thank you.
Yes, before we move, I think it's very interesting to briefly mention what, in your having the experience of done these projects already and in the housing sector, what are the key requirements for bankable projects in the housing sector? And it's not a simple answer, I'm sure, but in your experience and with the projects that you finance in housing.
Sure. So, I mean, as you say, it's very project specific, but in general, bankability really, first of all, depends on the overall enabling environment. So again, you know, some of our partner institutions work on that. But then at the project level, ultimately, infrastructure project finance is all about risk allocation, right? So we have to allocate risk to the parties who are able to bear it best, and there's a whole range of project level risks. We have, you know, the political and the macro risk, but then at the project level we have the market and the demand risk, the technical risk, financial, environmental, social, etc. And of course, climate risks are important in this context as well, and they have a number of implications. Because they do impact revenue generation, for example, so they can impact financial viability of the project as well. So we really need to think through how we structure this from the beginning. And with regards to bankability, for example, you know, one of the risks is force majeure, which is, well, that disaster or climate basically hits. That can be insured, for example, so that's something that we can do at the structuring level. With regards to the revenue risk, there are mechanisms to address that, particularly in the setting of low-income households, so viability gap payments, for example, that the government can provide. And this we are supporting in another social housing project that we are developing together with the World Bank in India, the Tamil Nadu Shelter Fund, and that is actually a financing mechanism that provides cross-subsidization to the developer, reallocating from highly profitable households to lower income households in terms of covering the viability gap there. And then, of course, another important risk is also the allocation of the land availability risk and mitigating that. So ideally, you know, the government makes sure that the private developer has all the permits, licenses, etc. that is required, or alternatively, the government can also provide the land itself, as it is doing in Timor-Leste in the project that we are supporting. And other important factors like building standards and law also come into play when we're discussing social housing.
Yeah, and I think that applies both to just the housing and the reconstruction as well. No, these are things, building blocks that we need to take care of both in the normal housing and the reconstruction. So I think from the two presenters, we see the different roles that the public sector can play, and also institutions or funds like GIF, facilitating, catalyzing this type of projects. We are going to move ahead with our next panelist, which is Mr. Jitendra Balani, Director of Global Financial Inclusion and Capital Markets at Habitat for Humanity. I believe this is your presentation. So you can tell me, or I can manipulate.
I'll tell you when to move, yeah.
Yes?
This is okay.
Okay.
Hi everyone, so I'm Jitendra, I'm from Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity International is an international NGO which works in the affordable housing sector. Now, what has been our traditional model? We raise grants from corporate foundations, FOI, individual grants from the high net worth individuals, and build houses for the poor people. Now, what is the biggest constraint in this model is that it is always grant dependent, right? With the grants, how many houses you can develop? 50K, 100K houses in a year at max. So around 14 years ago, we had a very pivotal moment in our organization strategy. And there was a question asked by our international board of directors, what it would take to meaningfully impact the housing deficit, right? So, and that is where, there was an ambition to involve the private sector. Just like my fellow speaker mentioned, private sector is very critical in meeting the affordable housing deficit. So at that time, there was also a microfinance movement going on, right? Muhammad Yunus, the Grameen lending model was very predominant. And some of our national offices, which are registered as NGOs, they went into direct lending and provided housing finance to the low-income families. Now, as an NGO, you cannot get into the lending activity because in many markets, there is a restriction, right? So that is where we had our own learning curve. And we realized we need to work with the industry, and microfinance industry was a predominant distribution channel. Now, the target segment which we have in the affordable housing sector is predominantly a low-income family which earns somewhere around $300 to $500 income. Now, in the developing world, in all the emerging markets, people construct their houses incrementally. So over a period of 15 to 20 years, they achieve a fully functioning housing unit. Unlike you and me, with God's grace, we can go into a commercial bank and we can get a new purchase. We can get a mortgage for a new purchase house, right, on an instant. But for many people, housing is a process. And what are the three major challenges which these families face? Of course, the affordable housing finance is a major big constraint. And then access to quality materials, durable materials, is also a second big constraint. And many times there is an information asymmetry. These people are not aware about the building practices, the resilient practices. Can we go to the next slide? So we launched our first ever blended housing finance facility, which is Microbuild First Fund. It's a $100 million fund which works with the microfinance institutions. So we provide wholesale lendings to them, and in turn they are able to give loans to the low-income families. And on the top of it, we also provide them the technical assistance and the advisory support so that they can launch well-designed products for the low-income people segment. Now, technical assistance was very critical. It was not just about capital, but also the capacity building aspect, because microfinance industry was used to providing loans for income generation. They were getting into housing for the first time. So it was a behavior change exercise for them, and that is where we had to blend the capital access with the advisory support. Next slide. So in a period of 12 years, we have disbursed around 230 million USD. Now, many of you would ask, it's a $100 million fund, how can we lend 230 million? Because our fund is of 12 years, and within 12 years, we were able to recycle the loans twice. And we have been able to work with 62 institutions, and we have directly impacted around 235K families, which is around 1.2 million individuals. Now, what has happened is that many times these microfinance institutions have gone into other commercial investors, other local banks, and they have told us that we have piloted a new product on housing finance with the help of Microbuild Fund. And now we already have a prototype. Can you give us more financing so that we can scale the product? And they have been able to leverage our investment to at least 6 times. So as you can see, there is a figure of 1.09 billion. So with a lending of 230 million, we have been able to catalyze the private sector market by almost 5 times of our initial investment. Yeah, so this is a family which got impacted with the help of the Microbuild Fund. They were able to secure a loan from Komida, which is an institution in Indonesia, well-known microfinance institution. And this family was building the house for almost 7 years. But when they had a loan, they were able to construct a fully functioning housing unit within the next 3 months' time. And it's a pure disaster-resilient house. Yeah, next slide, please. So now we are moving into the second phase of our journey within this space. So we are launching our second fund, which will be 5 times of the initial fund size. Now, when we launched this fund, we were the first ever affordable housing finance focused fund. And this remains, even in today's environment, that is the reality. Unfortunately or fortunately, nobody has stepped into with a dedicated focus on affordable housing finance. So for us, the gap is huge. It's a $13 trillion market in the affordable housing finance space. And if you narrow down to the financial inclusion community, which is microfinance institution, it's around a gap of 45 billion USD. So whatever we are doing, it's still a drop in the ocean, even with the second fund. Next slide. Now, that is a key difference. I just want to highlight the key difference between the first fund and the second fund. Now, with the first fund, we have already proven the commercial viability and impact viability of affordable housing finance. It's a commercial solution and yet highly impactful, right? But with the second fund, we want other investors to mainstream this affordable housing finance into their balance sheet, into their portfolio. So we want to really catalyze the private market, and they should come on board and they should invest in this segment, because then only we'll be able to close the capital gap which exists in the market. The other aspect which is different from the first fund is that we are also focused on the supply side in the second fund. So many times the low-income family, the photos that you saw in the previous slide, they go to a nearby store to purchase building materials. And often these stores are called micro and small enterprises. They also have access to finance issue, right? And often these institutions, these enterprises are served by the same microfinance institution. So in the second fund, we are focused on both the demand side and the supply side ecosystem. How are we embedding resiliency into our work? So of course, we don't just want to give the loans, right? We also want to make sure that the families are building disaster resilient housing. So often technical assistance involves training the direct communities, the masons, the foremen on the safe building practices. It also involves behavior change elements. And we are also working with the partnership models where a material provider and a financing institution coming together and providing a bundled solution so that we are ensure of the loan utilization. There are few customers who are eligible for micro mortgages. So over there, we are making sure that there is a technical and legal appraisal of the property before lending. And the fourth is financing certified green and affordable housing, like the EDGE certification, which you highlighted.
That's it? That's the last one? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This is actually very interesting. I think gradually we get a little bit of picture of the complexity of the building blocks of the housing sector. Can you share a little bit another example of in other places where this has been sort of applied?
Sure. So we are present in 33 countries through this fund. So in addition to Indonesia, I just want to take an example. Let's talk about Kenya. So we are working again with one of the largest institutions. And this institution was doing a water and sanitation hygiene financing. It's a very traditional micro loan, which is around $200 to $300 for installing a toilet or a bathroom in the house. Now, this institution, when they were lending to the community mentioned that, they have huge housing aspirations, because housing is a process where, families have various aspirations, and they wanted some larger loan sizes and a longer tenor solution. Unlike a microfinance typical loan, which is around 12 months to 24 months, housing is a long-term solution. So you have to have at least 3 to 5 year loan product for the family. And so we started with this institution. We went through the entire journey of technical assistance, did the market diagnostics, and launched a product with them. And over a period of time, they have now impacted almost 20,000 families with a dedicated housing microfinance solution. And they have also gone with other local commercial banks. Commercial banks have also given more money so that they can scale their housing microfinance portfolio.
Very interesting. Yes, microfinance is always the issue of the length of the product, no? That is constraining. We'll get, I think, back to your question with some of your questions to this, but before, let's move to our fourth panelist, Mr. Rogerio Castro Vázquez, the Secretary General of Infonavit, which is one of the largest mortgage lenders in Latin America, based in Mexico. He will be presenting in Spanish some slides that I have to put here. Control F, Control F, Control L. Got it. Okay. Por favor, si pueden comenzar.
Pues muy buenas tardes, amigas, amigos. Es un gusto estar acá. Estamos representando a esta institución que particularmente está formado por recursos de los trabajadores formales o de los que se conocen del mercado formal. Estos trabajadores aportan el 5% de su salario y se va creando un fondo mutualista, porque todos los que participan ayudan a que se financien los créditos que se dan, en este caso, créditos hipotecarios. En el caso del Infonavit, al ser su naturaleza principalmente de estos recursos, tiene un gobierno dividido en tres fuerzas, que son el sector gubernamental, por supuesto, el sector empresarial y el sector de los trabajadores, cada uno con 5 diferentes sillas
Sorry, perdón.
cada uno con 5 sillas en el Consejo de Administración. Yo, como secretario general, tengo que acordar con los consejeros y se van, por supuesto, atendiendo los temas de la administración. Lo que les decía, el 5%, estamos hablando de 1.1 millones de empresarios o de empresas, 22.8 millones de trabajadores, y solo en 2024 tenemos una recaudación de 3.27 billones de dólares. En cuanto a los créditos que se van recuperando, porque ya llevamos a una institución ya de 50 años de existencia, hemos otorgado casi 12 millones o un poco más de créditos hipotecarios, más otros créditos que se otorgan que a continuación les voy a ir mostrando. Pero la principal fortaleza del Infonavit no solo es financiera, sino también que contribuye a la seguridad social de los trabajadores. Es decir, además de generar este fondo que también va a las pensiones o forma parte de las pensiones, también otorga un crédito para vivienda. Yo siempre lo digo a donde voy, si no existiera el Infonavit, muchos trabajadores en México no tendrían una casa. Así, de ese nivel, lo que tenemos en el Infonavit. Y son 3.6 millones de créditos que hoy están, digamos, pagándose, y 3.8 billones en intereses por ingresos en el 2024. También tenemos un fondo de inversiones que se creó aproximadamente en el año 2014 más o menos, con la idea de ir generando, por supuesto, activos que permitan financiar también las pensiones, o sobre todo también generar más beneficios a los trabajadores, porque los trabajadores que no usan su dinero, que están aportando y que no usan el crédito para una casa, ese dinero al final se le va a regresar en la pensión. Por lo tanto, tiene que haber un, obviamente le llaman en el mercado financiero, pues debe haber algo adicional que se le otorga al trabajador. Entonces estamos hablando de que en ese sentido 40.84 billones en este fondo, y esto se va a la tesorería en 1.22 billones. También es importante decirles que hemos otorgado en este sexenio, porque aquí sí quisiera resaltarlo, el Infonavit es una institución de 50 años y ahora México atraviesa por una transformación de gobierno, en donde llegó un gobierno que ya puso en el centro la seguridad social, y en este caso durante estos 6 años se han dado 2.5 millones de créditos a los trabajadores y 170,000 créditos en 2024. Esto representa 3.8 billones de dólares otorgados en beneficios a los trabajadores. Y también ahorramos para incrementar las pensiones, estamos hablando de 77.3 millones de cuentas de trabajadores, tanto que hoy están activos como que no están activos, y 6.33% de rendimiento. Esto significa 6.53 billones que fueron distribuidos en todas estas cuentas. Y por supuesto en este sexenio también se puso énfasis, la verdad es que teníamos un gran problema de cartera vencida y muchos trabajadores estaban perdiendo sus casas, incluso se les quitaban a la mala las viviendas a través de procesos judiciales, porque antes de este periodo había mucha corrupción en el Poder Judicial, y en ese lapso se cometieron muchas injusticias a los trabajadores. Todos los trabajadores que tenían deudas logramos reestructurar las deudas para que puedan pagarlas, para que puedan ser créditos más accesibles, Estamos hablando de 5.1 millones de trabajadores que fueron beneficiados con reestructuras en su crédito. El Infonavit representa la siguiente, aquí lo vemos en el mercado, el 58%, y con respecto a la banca, estamos hablando de por número de créditos, ¿no? Y también ahí cambia un poco en razón de la distribución de los recursos, obviamente porque la banca presta más que nosotros, presta mayores montos, sin embargo estamos casi a la par que la banca y estamos hablando de que estamos representando casi el 82% del mercado total. Las tasas de interés que hoy ofrece el Infonavit, la verdad es que son de las más bajas en el país, porque estamos hablando de que estamos atendiendo a trabajadores pobres. Estos son algunos de los programas. El que más ha tenido mucho éxito es, por ejemplo, el tercero que está aquí, que se llama Unamos Créditos, en donde 2 trabajadores pueden unir su crédito para comprar una mejor casa. Esto también forma parte de los nuevos créditos que se ofrecen, y también estamos atendiendo una parte muy importante que es las mujeres, porque en México el mercado formal lamentablemente es constituido de más del 60% de hombres, y esto genera que los créditos precisamente no se otorguen a las mujeres. Por eso creamos el crédito Mujer Infonavit. La siguiente. Bueno, obviamente la construcción de la vivienda depende de un desarrollador, no propiamente el Infonavit construye. Sin embargo, tenemos todo un proceso de verificación. Generamos algo que se llama un dictamen técnico, que al final es lo que permite financiar el crédito. Si no tiene ese dictamen técnico, que pasa por un proceso de verificación que ustedes pueden ver, en donde el desarrollador registra su paquete, va a un verificador a revisar que tenga y cumpla todas las condiciones que ponen los municipios, los estados, pagos de impuestos y todo eso, y al final se genera un dictamen técnico que permite financiar la vivienda. Adicionalmente a eso, el Infonavit cuenta con un seguro de calidad en su crédito en caso de que pasara algo posterior a la compra de la vivienda. Tiene un seguro de calidad. También en caso de un desastre cuenta con un seguro de daños, también está perfectamente protegido el trabajador, y en caso de que falleciera también cuenta con un seguro de defunción que le permite liquidar el crédito y entregarse al beneficiario familiar que en este caso herede la vivienda. Adicionalmente a estos procesos de verificación, el Infonavit cuenta también con unos polígonos. Esto es algo nuevo que hicimos en este sexenio. Son polígonos que vamos definiendo de acuerdo a ciertas características que tienen que ver primero, por ejemplo, si esos polígonos cuentan con un centro de salud, cuentan con un centro de abasto de alimentos, cuenta con carreteras que le permitan transportarse a su trabajo, también que cuente con internet y una serie de atributos que forman parte de la vivienda adecuada. Es decir, aparte de esto, nosotros tenemos criterios para definir los polígonos en donde se va a construir una vivienda. Estamos poniendo orden en ese sentido en el desarrollo de vivienda en el país. Y bueno, adicionalmente el Infonavit, cuando ha ocurrido algún desastre, aunque en ese sentido el Infonavit no tiene un fondo en particular, cuando ocurren estas situaciones, sí ha habido por parte del Consejo de Administración muchas resoluciones en donde hemos atendido particularmente estos desastres que han ocurrido, tanto sismos, lluvias, huracanes y una serie de cuestiones. Y finalmente el Infonavit va a pasar a una nueva etapa. Viene una nueva etapa en México, estamos seguros porque va a venir una continuidad de… La siguiente, por favor. Va a venir una continuidad en este gobierno y vamos a pasar a algo adicional que el Infonavit, este sexenio quizá nos enfocó. El Infonavit, cuando nació, construía vivienda. Sin embargo, por mucho tiempo se corrompió el sistema y las viviendas las construían únicamente ciertas organizaciones y por eso se dejó de usar ese sistema de construcción de vivienda directa. Pero ahora está planteándose en una reforma constitucional que esperamos que se apruebe en los próximos meses, en donde se reforma este artículo para que el Infonavit cree un sistema de vivienda, no solamente construya, sino también cree las condiciones para poder hacer casas más baratas, casas mejor ubicadas en los centros de trabajo y también, por supuesto, la planificación urbana que llevan a cabo los estados y los municipios y el propio gobierno federal, también venga articulado al desarrollo de vivienda. Eso es lo que viene para el Infonavit en el futuro y estos son algunos de los puntos que quería exponerles. La verdad es que quiero agradecerles la invitación y sobre todo que el Infonavit es una institución tan fuerte que hoy tiene, por supuesto, no solo una fortaleza financiera, sino también a millones de trabajadores que hoy gozan de este derecho humano. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. I'm conscious of time. We have 8 minutes, and I don't know if there's another session, so I have lots of questions, but I think it's more important if you have questions. We use this time for you, and do you have any question, please raise your hand. I think there are colleagues up there with some microphones that can help us. Yeah. No? Everything's super clear? No? Okay. I have a question then for all of you that are financing housing, no? Either microfinance or more mortgage finance, or looking at the upstream, like GIF is trying to think of projects hopefully for financing, no? And considering we have a mayor sitting here with us, what, in your opinion, is the most important thing that the government needs to set on the table for you to be able to do your job as financiers properly?
I can start, and please feel free to contribute. So one of the things which is very critical, presence of the local capital markets, right? Affordable housing, you have to invest long term. So your local markets should be developed in such a manner that there are plethora of financial instruments available where investors can come in, can go out quickly. There should be a presence of the secondary market as well. Private sector companies should be able to raise money easily. So that is one of the very critical factors. And the second thing which I would say is that also on the risk management side. So like there were few markets where we could not lend through the microbuild fund because we are a dollar denominated fund and we have our own threshold return which we want to meet. And every loan is fully hedged. So if you go to Africa and some of the markets, the currency volatility is such that the lending rate will be around 20-25% because banks are also lending at that rate, right? So it's not a commercial viable solution. So leveraging donor capital, the blended finance in such a creative manner that you can even prove a viability in those markets. So we had a donor who supported us with a foreign exchange facility. So instead of buying a commercial foreign exchange solution, we were relying on the donor facility. So we were able to manage that risk. They gave us 1 million. And the concept was that if our return falls below 6.5%, we'll be able to tap into that facility. But, you know, it was based on the pooling of assets concept. So losses in one currency will be offset by gains in another currency. So we were able to lend in 10 markets. We were able to multiply by that capital by 10 times. And the facility is intact. So having creative solutions around the risk management to prove the viability is also critical.
Okay, yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to come after this. I think these are very important aspects. So from a government perspective, I would just say really make sure that the entire chain and ecosystem works, right? So we discussed on the upstream side to really government support to addressing key risks like the land risk, for example. That's often a key bottleneck to getting these projects off the ground. So that needs to be addressed, making sure that you have a solid risk allocation as part of project structuring, and then looking at the viability gap for private developers for sure, but then also making sure in the downstream finance that you actually have access to mortgage finance and instruments that allow people to buy these homes, and if they don't exist, put, as our colleague said, blending solutions into place or kind of, mitigation solutions that de-risk and can bring in the necessary maturities and also affordability in terms of interest rates. So it's not one factor. I think it's a very complex sector, and it has to be, fully in place upstream, midstream, downstream.
Please.
Okay. This for my side as the government. As the policy of the government, we have a program, renovation of houses for the poor especially, and we have a subsidized program to the poor. So probably this program can be joined by the financing. And if we're talking about Indonesia was a big market. And if we are related to the prawn area, Indonesia was number 2nd of the prawn country here in the world. So I don't want to say this is a market. I don't want to say this is a market, but it is. It is a big market. So, and I believe the government in Indonesia fully supported for everything that will be needed by the investors, especially about the financing. Yeah, I'm gonna say I welcome you to Indonesia. I ask you to come to my country, and want to invest everything, and I believe our government will give you a big support for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think from the perspective of the World Bank in our projects, I think critical aspects are from the supply side, what Astrid mentioned, the land and the infrastructure, particularly for the resilience of housing, because if we do that right, you sort of reduce a lot of the risk, at least the risk of what we started saying, the risk that the houses, which is the most important asset that any of us will probably invest in, doesn't totally get destroyed in some of the events that are more and more happening with more recurrency and more, and they're more powerful than ever. No, I'm going to give another chance if there are any questions, any other comments. Yes, please, Jane.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on actually one of the points you had at the end there. The critical issue of the people who most need the affordable housing don't necessarily own the land that they live on and don't have the access to land. How, in each of your cases, have you addressed that within the products that you offer? And it's sort of a role that the government plays, but also how have you, as financial institutions and mortgage lenders, how do you address the issue of land ownership for your customers?
Okay, let me say in my country, we have a program say that PTSL. PTSL was a distribution of land by the government. So we identified the poor people that who doesn't have land. So we support them by giving them a land. That the land is belong to the. It's coming from the nation.
Okay.
It's shared to the people. That's one of the. One's the best program that Mr. Jokowi as a president at this time give to the people through the distribution of land to the poor people. Yeah.
We are working in a state of Orissa in India, so just giving an example. So our local national office, they are working with the state government and procuring the lands for families. And simultaneously, the government is also giving a minor subsidy of around $2,000 so that they can undertake a home construction process. And now we are bringing a third element, which is the gap financing from a housing finance company. So combining land parcel from the government, subsidy, and a private sector solution, we are providing a holistic solution to the families, and around 350 families have been impacted already. So just giving you an example of a prototype.
¿Está bien si le traduzco la pregunta?
Sí, si quieres tú, pues yo se le doy. Rogelio, Jane preguntaba si tienen algún programa para la gente que no tiene acceso a suelo, que es uno de los problemas más comunes, ¿no? Gente que no es tanto el crédito, sino que no tienen el suelo, que sí existe algo en los productos que ustedes tienen.
El suelo.
El terreno.
El terreno, sí, claro. Tenemos un nuevo crédito, de hecho, en la reforma de 2020 que hicimos en este sexenio, establecimos dos nuevos paradigmas para la vivienda. Uno es que el trabajador pudiera tener más de un crédito y el otro es que pueda comprar suelo. Entonces, se vuelve también, o se cambia esa idea de que tenemos que tener una casa ya hecha por un constructor o un desarrollador, para pasar a la idea de que el trabajador puede ir planeando y construyendo su casa de manera progresiva, ¿no? Primero comprando el suelo, y en ese crédito lo que establecimos es que le damos el crédito de suelo, después de 2 años de pagarlo de manera puntual, se le da que esa fue otra reforma que hicimos, un refinanciamiento, que eso tampoco se podía antes de reformar la ley, se refinancia y se le da un crédito adicional, que eso le permite construir la casa.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think this was a productive session. Thank you for joining, thank you for attending, and thank you so much to our panelists for sharing the experience.